Melissa,
Sarah.
what are we reading today?
We are reading Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin.
Yes.
Sarah, before we start talking about the contents of this book, I want to talk about the physical object of this book, if I may. Firstly, for those of our listeners, viewers, whatever, who are following along with our 2025 reading goals, I did fork over some money for this book. I did pay for this book. I purchased it, which is why I was able to, do so much to manipulate its existence. But I did buy this one. I didn't get it from the library. It's for, a couple of different reasons. I did want to own this book. We're going to do this book for my book club, which I haven't even talked to all the listeners about the fact that I'm in a book club now. Gasp! This is big. This is a big deal. And it's well within my budget. But I just want to say, this is a beautiful book. I absolutely love it. So just aesthetically, it's a lovely thing to look at. So I have to check my notes because I don't. After some of the butchering of names I've done over the years, I'm going to get this one right. So the image on the front is of a painting sometimes known as Under the Wave of Kanagawa, or also The Great Wave by Katsushika Hokusai, so a Japanese visual artist. So it's a familiar image. I'm sure a lot of people have seen it, but then it's kind of overlaid with the title in a font that I feel like we used in the 90s with what we thought we would be using in the 2020s. a font we thought the future would use, but we have not. But it's all rainbow style, rainbow in color.
Yeah.
And because I was, I knew I was going to own this book, and I was putting tabs on it, I realized after I had tabbed it out with, making my plans, the tabs matched the book itself, the rainbow and rainbow.
They do.
Right? I was hoping, I wish, looking back, I wish that I had taken a before, during, and after of this book, because when I purchased it, it was so crisp and so tidy and so lovely. It looked just gorgeous. So I should have just snapped a photo then and there. And I mean, it's not like I don't take photos of all kinds of random things all the time anyway, but I did not. I should have. And then I went in with all the dates that I wanted to have certain sections read by because of this book club commitment. And then when it was all nicely lined out the side and they were still nice and tabbed and nice and tidy and crisp, I was like, oh, I should have taken a photo then. But in the meantime, I dropped it in the bath at least twice. You can see the wrinkly, crinkly pages. So this book's been on a journey with me, but I feel like it just adds to the legacy of this book, and it looks very well loved, I'm sure, as you can see.
It does. Yes, it has been on a journey. And first, I do want to just acknowledge that my voice does not sound normally like this. If you close your eyes, it does maybe sound like you've called a 1-900 hotline, but just go with it. And then next time I'll sound, like my normal self. But anyway, back to the book. It's so funny that you mention, this idea of the journey that this book has gone through, and how it looks so different from when it first entered your hand to, us talking about it today. As you can see behind me, I have my copy of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which I actually got, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, I got it, I pre-ordered it. So it's a hardcover book. And I do think that there's a difference in terms of wear and tear between a hardcover and a paperback. Obviously, normally hardcover books tend to be more expensive. That's what's coming out when a book is first published. But I just think that they're made to be sturdier and to kind of last the test of time. But regardless of whether it's a hardcover, softcover book, I really take pride on my books looking as pristine as pristine as possible. So I almost want my books to look like they've never been cracked. And I don't know why. I don't know what that says about me. I do feel like that I'm like that in my environment. Like I love it when things are just like pristine and orderly and lovely. And so often it'll be funny because I'll lend a book to somebody that I've read it and it again still looks brand new. And when it comes back to me, it's worn. And of course, really seeing that with like a soft cover book. And I'm like, my God, what did they do with this book?
They
Read it in
dropped
the
it in the
bathroom?
bathtub at least twice.
Yeah, and it's so funny because you have alluded to this multiple times, multiple episodes that you love nothing more than reading a book in a bath. I never will bring a book even within a foot of a bathtub. Like I just because the idea of getting those pages crinkly and wrinkly, oh, it just like really, I don't know. It just
No, that
really
is
speaks.
a key. I think that though, like transcends many elements of your personality. That, like you said, like things being
Yeah.
orderly, which we are
Mhm.
definitely a yin and yang. I think
Yeah.
there, yeah, whatever that expression is, because I do feel like, and I was saying this a little bit jokingly before, but I like the idea of my physical book sort of telling its own little story. Like I remember in university, I used to kind of like it if I get a little bit of coffee or something, like on a particular page where I was spending a bit more time than others, and be like, oh, okay, this page had a little bit more life to it, or like I said, this like legacy that the book carries with it. So definitely something that you and I differ on there, because this is a well-loved book. Now, I don't want it looking, like a disaster. I don't want it to be like defaced. But even like
Yeah.
I think we've talked about this separately too. When it comes to the tabs, I've never seen you hold up a book where the tabs are even curled in this way. Like yours come out at like, perfect 90-degree angles, and they're
I'll even trim them. I'll trim them so
oh.
that they're like all aligned with one another. It's ridiculous.
No, it's lovely. So
Yeah.
that's my little banter that I wanted to get out there about the exterior of the book. The book as like the physical object. But we
Mhm.
should probably dive in to the contents of the book. And so I thought I'm not going to reinvent the wheel here. I'm going to read for the purposes of a summary. I'm just going to read right from the back. And I do think it's like work smarter, not harder. Somebody out
Right.
there put a lot of effort into, trying to distill this into sort of a blurb for the back. But it's a sign of a good book, I think, when there's just so many different layers and so many different directions or pathways, which we'll get into talking about in the discussion, that it's really difficult to sort of narrow it down to one succinct kind of summary. So I'm going to read straight from the back. This is what the publishers even wanted us to know about this book. On a bitter cold day in the December of his junior year at Harvard, Sam Mazer exits a subway car and sees, amid the hordes of people waiting on the platform, Sadie Green. He calls her name. For a moment, she pretends she hasn't heard him, but then she turns and a game begins, a legendary collaboration that will launch them to stardom. These friends, intimate since childhood, borrow money, beg favors, and before even graduating college, they have created their first blockbuster. Overnight, the world is theirs, spanning 30 years from Cambridge to Venice Beach. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is a dazzling novel that examines the multifarious nature of identity, disability, failure, the redemptive possibilities in play, and above all, our need to connect, to be loved and to love. Yes, it is a love story, but it is not one you have read before. So Sarah, you've had this book now for years. You read it, I think you read it near the end of 2023, if I'm remembering correctly.
I, I was trying to think about this and I actually looked at when the book was published because I was trying to think. Somebody had recommended it to me, my cousin, Trina, so not someone who we've mentioned previously on this podcast. But she had, I think, seen an article about it and it was like an early review before the book was officially out. And she had recommended it to me. And then I ended up, again, pre ordering it. And for some reason, I thought it was like the first book of maybe 2023 that I had read. I see that it was released in 2022. So I'm like trying to put it together. But I guess all of that goes to say that it has been several years since I have read this book. So probably at a minimum 2 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. So yes, it's definitely something that it's been on my shelf. It's something that I read as soon as I got it, but it's been a while since I've revisited the book.
And I guess without getting into like too many, points of the book yet, like did even that summary resonate with you? Were you like, oh, I could have said that verbatim. I remember exactly what this book was about, or did it just kind of like help you remember it? Did any of the brief summary there like kind of spark anything for you?
It did, and we'll get more obviously within our conversation about like how we feel about this book or what we think about this book, but again, having read it, multiple years ago, the summary definitely brought me back. And even when we were discussing this episode and you said, I think I want to do tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, I just finished it. I started thinking, like, what do I remember from that book? And I feel like I remember a good portion of it, which I feel like is a testament to the story itself. The fact that it can be, 2+ years between me reading it and us talking about it, and I can still recall overarching themes, the story itself, and even like some of the details of the book. And so I feel pretty good about that. But I think it was a good summary. And, I think the publishers chose well in their choice to use that
Yeah,
as the summary.
someone at Penguin really knows what they're doing,
They
apparently.
do.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, as you've probably gathered by this point, we are going to take like a little bit of a different approach with this one because technically this episode is sort of like Melissa's pick for a book, but we don't normally do these types of episodes in such a way that we have both read the book unless we set out to have kind of like a back and forth conversation. And I didn't actually set out to have this as my pick for one of our episodes at all, but I had heard from you about it, and it's one of those books that's kind of everywhere. Like it gets a lot of, screen time in like the algorithm kind of thing. So it's definitely drawn to it. And actually, this is really like the Sarah's Cousins episode because your other cousin, Steph, also, way back when we first started the podcast, we put it out and said, like, what kind of books, is there any particular book that anybody wants us to talk about? And she actually referenced this book, just sort of saying, like, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it. So it all kind of worked out. Like I said, it's like a book club pick, and then Steph had recommended it. You've also read it, and then, of course, today we were going to record. So I was like, let's just do this. Like, let's do tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow as the conversation. So as I am very well known for doing, I'm going to take an approach to this conversation in the same way that I go fishing for compliments, which is by sort of humble brag complimenting other people and hoping that they'll reciprocate by telling me the exact same thing. And we've talked about me doing this on the podcast before. My most famous instance of this is when Sarah and I had gone on a vacation in the Caribbean. We came back very well tanned, and then I had a tendency of telling our friends like that they had nice tans, even though they'd been in St. John's, where they were not sunning themselves. But basically, it was so that they could be like, you actually have a very good tan, and I would accept the compliment. So what I'll do today is sort of preamble a question that I will pose to you. I obviously do want to hear what you have to say about it, but then secretly hoping that you'll ask me the same question. So that's kind of the format that we're going to go for. Sound good?
You got it. And nice tan, Melissa. And I love how generous you are in saying that we came back nicely tanned, because if anyone can see me right now, as you all are looking at me, I am not one who tans very well. So, yes.
You definitely, there was evidence of that the sun had, you were sun-kissed. That's the way to put it. You were
Yes.
sun-kissed. So, okay, so here we go. We'll get into this. So one of the themes that really becomes apparent very early on in this book is this idea that there is what the road not taken, if we can kind of borrow from Frost. And certainly this author does borrow from lots of other authors in really clever, masterful ways that I really loved. So the idea that the series of decisions that you make that guide your life's path, they result in where you end up, and then that determines what's going to happen in your life. And then simultaneously, there's all the decisions or the options that you didn't take, all the roads and the paths that were not taken, and that in some ways maybe they are also sort of a parallel life that could be happening somewhere else. And I think that this particular theme bubbles to the forefront very early on when Sam acknowledges openly that he had always kind of known that his mother had considered having an abortion when she was pregnant with him. So he knows that there is a very possible other timeline, other series of decisions that happened that came very close to happening in which he would not have existed. So I think that sort of is one of the earliest points that we start considering that idea of these alternate paths through life, or these various options, and things being very if this then that, if this then that kind of thing. But then it's also made all the more obvious when Sam and his mother invent a game where they try to take a different route home every time they go visit his grandparents. So it's a little game that they've come up with because they heard there's a set of secret passageways through Los Angeles, and they want to try to find them, so that they're going to try to sort of scour this whole the area between the grandparents' house and their house, and every time they take a different route. And one of the times on the route that they take, they end up in a car crash which kills Sam's mother and ends up injuring his foot extremely badly, which has an impact on his life. Obviously, his mother's life is ended, and then the lives of everyone around them are impacted by this. So this idea that you can make, if you decide to take one road, your life's going to go in one way. If you decide to take another road, it's going to go in a different way. So I do wonder, and this is the first question I'm going to ask you, and then maybe you'll ask it back to me, is about this theme of the road not taken, this series of events that allows you to take a particular path through life, but were there different directions that conversation or that lifetime could have taken? Did that resonate with you in any way?
It certainly did. And ultimately, it was this idea of the road not taken that drew me to this book, and was why my cousin had recommended it to me. Was this idea of, in particular, the relationship and friendship between Sam and Sadie, and kind of the ins and outs of that, and the course of that relationship is what drew me to it. And I love anytime there's like a path not taken, sliding doors kind of element within a story. I'm always like a sucker for that. But I really think there's a few things, and again, like the author, I feel like, is clever in the way, as you reference, like she uses other stories and she references them in unique ways within the book. But really, I think the biggest way that she plays with this idea of the road not taken is the whole fact that the entire story is built around the process of developing and playing, or playing and then developing video games. Because that is a place where you're acting that out. You can play a video game over and over and over and over again, and you can play it differently each time. Will you get the same results? Does the video game hold certain surprises within it, that if you take these different paths, that you'll reach these different conclusions? And I feel like all throughout the story, that is really what she's kind of talking about. And I think maybe in the idea of both characters, the Sam character in particular, like you said, like he always knew that his mother had considered not having him before she ended up having him. And then the idea of, if they had not taken that particular route when visiting his grandparents, maybe she wouldn't have had that accident, and she wouldn't have been killed, and he wouldn't have had that injury, but then he wouldn't have met Sadie. And, there's so many what ifs of what could have happened if, a different road, a different path was taken. And I love the way that that's explored. And I think it really makes you think about these characters and their stories, all within that context of like the playing of and the development of, or creation of, this idea of story, and giving people the opportunity to play out these different scenarios of like, well, if you do this, what will happen? So, yeah. How about you, Melissa?
Thanks. I thought you'd never ask. Yeah, absolutely. And no, I agree with that. And I feel like it's kind of like a slippery slope, sort of like find that balance between it can be a lot of fun to think about like the multitude of things that had to happen in order for something else to happen. And, obviously, because we always do this, I got to bring it back to like how our grad class, where you and I met, where I met my husband, like all of the things that had to happen for all of us to end up in that room, in that program at the same time. People living in all different places. Why did we choose to go to that particular school? Anyone could have made any other number of different decisions that go even beyond our own decision making to end up in that place, and yet it worked out. And it's like it feels so, serendipitous or something. And it's a lovely thing to think about how many things went right for us to all end up in that room. But then it's like, you also kind of have to make sure you don't allow yourself to play that game in the other direction, right? And I think everyone has sort of a series of, what if I had done this? What if I hadn't done that? For sort of more negative things that happen in our lives too. So trying to kind of strike that balance, because it's a bit of a losing game, right? To use a gaming metaphor there,
Yeah.
like, to think about things that we maybe regret or wish hadn't happened, when really we can't go back. It isn't a video game. So I do think that there's a passage I'm just going to reference here that does a nice job of kind of summarizing that notion. So I think it does a good job of addressing it without being too on the nose. So this is like relatively early on, I'd say like, within the first quarter-ish of the book here. Okay, so they're young. They are in the stage at this point of Sadie and Sam are making their very first video game that goes on to be like that blockbuster hit. But Sam kind of goes missing, and she's gone out to look for him, and she's sort of reflecting on that. On the night Sam went missing, it occurred to Sadie that nothing in life was as solid state as it appeared. A childish game might be deadly. A friend might disappear. And as much as a person might try to shield herself from it, the possibility for the other outcome was always there. We are all living at most half of a life, she thought. There was the life you lived, which consisted of the choices you made. And then there was the other life, the one that was the things you hadn't chosen. And sometimes this other life felt as palpable as the one you were living. Sometimes it felt as if you might be walking down Brattle Street, and without warning you could slip into this other life, like Alice falling down the rabbit hole that led to Wonderland. You would end up a different version of yourself in some other town, but it wouldn't be strange like Wonderland, not at all, because you would have expected all along that it could have turned out that way. You would feel relief because you had always wondered what that other life would have looked like, and there you were. And even rereading that, I actually picked up on some other things that I hadn't even connected there, but there's actually a really recurring image in this book of a woman falling from the sky. Basically, it's someone who leaps from a building and falls in front of Sam and his mother when he's really young. And so then when I was rereading this, and that whole idea of Alice falling down the rabbit hole, it's a reference. It's almost what they call in the gaming world like an Easter egg. But anyways, I hadn't even noticed that until I read it just now. But Sam and Sadie, when they're young, they have this idea that there's an optimal way to play any given video game, so that there's sort of like a series of the best decisions that you can make that bring you to the best version of the game, or closest to winning, or whatever the case may be. I'm not a gamer, so I don't exactly know what all the references are. But the idea that there is this sort of optimal set of play, and that's also how you would develop a game, so that you develop with the best options, but then there's also these other variables at play. But I think it's interesting because that little piece that I read there, like I said, is early on in the book. But we're with Sam and Sadie for about 30 years, 30 plus years, I would say, throughout their lives. And later on, Sadie's having a conversation with someone. It's a colleague, his name is Ant, so if I refer to Ant, it's just a coworker that they have. And it's almost as though it's the same understanding of these like paths not taken, or this set of opportunities that can result in one outcome or the other. But I think the more life experience that she's had, she has a different way of maybe considering that, sort of the differences between gaming world and sort of the real world, the lives that we're living. So I want to read that one too. And this one's later on. This is on page 381. And so like we're in like the last 20 pages of the book here. So as a bit of context, they're talking about someone that they both care deeply about who has passed away. And Ant was there on the day that he died. And Ant says, "I wish I could have saved him. I replay that day over and over again. If I hadn't gone down the stairs, if I hadn't let him go into the lobby, if Sadie stopped him. That's the gamer in you, trying to figure out how you might have beat the level. My brain is treacherous like that, too. But there was nothing you could have done. This game wasn't winnable." So I feel like there's growth there, too, in that she's like, we can do that what-if stuff that we might have done when we were younger, thinking about all these different paths, but sometimes there's just things that are going to happen that nobody has any control over. And I think that sort of, that comes around at that point in the book, too.
I love that. I love both of those passages, really. And I feel like I'm now like even getting deeper into like, oh yeah, that's right. And like remembering what it felt like to read the book itself. This is going to be like a maybe funny aside, I don't know, but totally connected to this experience of reading tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. When I read this book, I really read it for the Sadie Sam relationship and their friendship and all of that. That's what drew me to it. Over the last, I would say 6 months ish, my husband and my son have started to play video games together. And I myself am not a gamer at all. Like I grew up in the like dawn of Nintendo and had a Nintendo that I got when I was like maybe 7 years old. Played it a little, but never got into it enough where like I was just spending hours and hours and hours of my time playing games. And then they introduced me to other games and gaming systems. So I really am like not even a novice. Like I don't know anything about video games. And even with my son and my husband's kind of experience playing these games together, I really am trying to remove myself from it as much as possible. I will be in the room with them reading a book while they are playing, but I really have approached it as like this is a daddy son activity. But, you know, if you're in the room and this is process is going on hours and hours at a time, you can't help but know just by osmosis a little bit about the worlds that exist within these games. And so in particular, they have been playing Zelda and not like the 1980s version of Zelda, which I know Zelda is referenced in this book. But it's like the modern version of Zelda. And I have been really fascinated with the idea of like, wow, like the people who make these video games, not only the programming and the technology and the graphics end of that, but like these people are also developing worlds and stories and how involved that process is. And there have been so many times throughout the last several months where I've been like just kind of like glancing up at the screen and watching them play something, or I've been asking a question to Josh about like, now that character, what about this? Or asking something about the story, because of course that's always going to be what I am most interested in is the story of it all. And it's made me think about this book and the idea of this world that they're building in their video games, the world that they're living in, and the idea of how you shape an experience for a gamer and you yourself as the person creating it and then also engaging with it. Like it's so funny that I'm looking at the book a little bit differently now because I have a like I guess a newfound appreciation for everything that goes into this kind of experience, really. So,
Yeah,
anyway.
and like you, loved a little bit of Mario Brothers back in the day, but like it never really extended much beyond that. There's no like,
Yeah.
I think RPGs, role player game. Like I never got into that. It was never part of my world or my like leisure time or anything like that. So typically, if I had read the book jacket of this and it was all about, oh yeah, and then they make a game, I really would have put this book down. Like I would have just thought, this will not speak to me. This will not connect. I'm not be able to connect to it in any way. So not the case, and everyone really assured me of that. Like, no, it's a book about gaming, but you don't need to be a gamer to get it, and it's so true. And one of the things that I really loved about it was that it did put me in a different frame of mind. So it was like something that I was tangentially familiar with, being like games and that sort of thing. But so I knew enough about it for it to be able to like give me some perspective going into the book. But it was such an interesting take on sort of typical stories. And we'll get into this after, but when it says, yes, it's a love story, but not one you've read before, I feel like that could be said for all of the themes in the book. How often do we read books that are about the road not taken? All the time, but it does it in such a clever way. And this is a bit of a deep track, which I said, I was like, don't even bring this up in the episode because it's like a little bit too complicated, but here I go. There's like a whole section called Pioneers near the end of the book. And even when I got to that section, I was like, I don't think I'm gonna like this part, because effectively you enter into a video game and they're describing the video game, and some of their dialogue is even sort of like prompts or like they're saying like skip, like things that you would sort of enter on the console, I guess. It is so well done, and it does such a cool way of bringing you into that gaming realm. But then it also kind of like in a weird, I don't know if meta is like the right word to use there, but it brings you out of the game, because then you start to figure out who actually made the game, like which of the characters that actually created this game, in an effort to get people to play it so that they could reconnect with people. So then there's this turning point in that section, which is almost like a little mini book in its own right, that you start to realize whose perspective you're reading from. So you realize, oh, I'm not just reading the game, I'm reading a person playing the game, and I know who the player is, and I know who their opponents or their collaborators in the game are. And I remember being kind of like mind blown that the book could achieve that, that it could allow me, someone who's not really familiar with games, to get into that world, get into that mindset, and then to the degree that I could understand what was being talked about within the game world and what was being talked about outside of the game world. So it is really complicated, and one of the many themes of this book. So we've talked about the road not taken theme. Next, I want to bring us to the theme of work in this book. And I do mean like work, like labor, like putting effort and work into something. One of the book's main characters is even called Marx, and I don't think that's an accident necessarily. Usually naming's not in books, but there's this ongoing kind of like, almost like panicked energy in the book about, we got to get work done, the work needs to be done, we're the only people who can do this work. They're really, really driven by this idea of having to work. And I was wondering, when you read this, did you feel like that sort of motor in the book's, overall story of all this work that needs to be done, did that speak to you in the sense of like, you think it's reflective of like the video game industry? Was it reflective of the time period in which it was set, which like the sort of heavier parts are in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s? Was that something that stayed with you, or did that kind of fade a little bit as time has passed since you read the book?
I really did feel like it was so connected to the type of work, but also the type of maybe personality or talents of the people who are doing this type of work. So, like the whole gaming world, um, I really feel like, again, kind of referencing my own kind of epiphany about gaming through my experience observing people watching or playing games, um, and thinking about the amount of work it would take and the amount of people, the amount of hours, days, weeks, years that it would take to actually create this thing. And it's a form of art. It's this place where I think like art and science and math like really overlap and become entwined in an interesting way. And, when you think about an artist, a lot of times you think about like that artist's, mm, I don't know, need state and passion and feeling driven to complete a project, to create and complete a project. And I could really see that with them of like their lives really became the game and the building of the game. It's what they ate, drank, slept, or not slept, because it was like this all consuming act of creation. And they're gods in kind of funny ways, and that's even really kind of alluded to, I think, in the book. But yeah, I think it's the nature of that type of work. And again, I always am referencing pop culture. It's like a crutch that I lean on. But another kind of form of media that I consume, there's this television show. It's an Apple television show, and it's called Mythic Quest. And it was created and written by like Rob McElhaney, who made It's Only Sunny in Philadelphia, and he stars in it and he writes it. But it's all about Mythic Quest is the name of a game, and it's all the people that work in the office that are creating this game, and like so many parallels with his character in that show, and then his kind of creative partner. They're not, they're not like romantic interests to one another, but they're partners in a strange way, like soulmates. And they are so consumed with this act of creation like obsessed with the game that they're creating, or like the new version of the game that they're creating, that like their personal lives end up becoming not even secondary or tertiary, like they almost don't exist at all. And that's like something that the show plays with. So like again, like I just feel like there's so many things that I've like encountered that I'm like, it brings me back to this book of like, oh yeah, that's totally what Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow was about. So yeah, what did you think about the way that work is depicted and the relationship that the characters have with work in the book, Melissa?
Yeah, I totally agree with your point about like it being almost compulsive in relation to their creativity, right? And that idea that they feel like they're the only ones that can do this, but they can because they're the creators. But yet it also then allows them to explore sort of that necessity for collaboration in these creative projects as well. So yeah, I definitely think that everything you said is like totally spot on. And then I also think about how this book addresses grief in a lot of ways. So, I won't get into sort of, I've mentioned that Sam's mother passes away, but there's other instances of death and loss throughout the book. And I found it really interesting how they allowed for the book to deal with how work and grief go together. And I'll probably I'm just going to reference like something quickly just to kind of like start this off, and then I'll expound on it in my own personal experiences. But this is a conversation between Sam and Sadie. And so this is, maybe in the last, say, third or last quarter of the book, we'll say. And they've both lost someone really special to them. And so they own a company together, like a gaming company. And so this loss has certainly slowed production, and Sadie's actually like refusing to come back to work, but Sam has. So, and he's really trying to bring her back to work. And they've had kind of like a hot and cold relationship their whole lives. They've known each other since they were kids, and they've been incredibly connected, but then also incredibly disconnected throughout that time. So this is a time of disconnect for them, but he's really craving a reconnection with her, both for professional and for personal purposes, but she's not really there yet. So she says, "If you wanted to help me, you'd leave me alone." And then he says, "I'd positively love to leave you alone, but someone has to run our company." Sadie pulled her hands into the arms of her sweater. "Why?" Sadie said. "Why do we have to do any of this?" "For God's sake, because it's our company." Sam stood up and he almost thought he would collapse, the ghost foot beating like a heart. But instead of sitting down or mentioning the discomfort he was in, he let the pain and lack of sleep power his rage. I'm so tired of your crap. Do you honestly think you suffer more than everyone else? Do you think you suffer more than I do? Do you think you're the first person to ever have a baby or lose someone? Do you think you're some goddamn pioneer when it comes to grief? Sadie shifted forward, and he could feel the momentum of their argument. He could feel the cruel thing she was about to say in response to the cruel thing he had said, but the cruel thing did not arrive. Disturbingly, she slumped forward and started to weep. He watched her, but he did not go over to her. Snap out of it, Sadie. Come to the office. We work through our pain. That's what we do. We put the pain into the work, and the work becomes better. And I know this is a bit, it sounds like an extreme moment, but as you know, I lost my dad in 2016. And I remember, work was such a source of comfort for me at that time, because I felt like my whole world was just dissolving all around me. Like I was spiraling in every other facet of my life, trying to figure out how I was going to go on in this life without him. And at work, it was like I was focused, I had tasks, I had things I had to do, and I could kind of like use that as kind of a weird sense of control almost. Like it was the only part of my world where I could I could take control of things, and things felt more stable. And so that passage, I think, meant a lot to me, because I was like, I can totally relate to that feeling. But then there's another passage later on, and again, it's Ant, which is funny because Ant is really not a very important character
Like
in the
a real
book.
minor character.
But I'm realizing, I think what he did really well in the book was give both of them someone to talk to when they were disconnected. So it's like, oh, and then earlier, one was talking to Ant, now the other one is talking to Ant. But Ant also has this moment where he talks about about working in times of like trauma and stress. It's just like a short little thing, but I think this is really to your point of that compulsion when you're a creator, when you're a creative person. It's almost like things aren't complete unless you've created something that was like a result of it. And this one, there's a short, like an acronym, they say CPH. So CPH stands for Counterpart High, which is the name of a game that they've worked on. So this time Ant is talking to Sam. He says, truthfully, Sam, I was grateful for Counterpart High. I was grateful to not have to be in this world. Ant paused. Sometimes when I'm working on CPH, that world feels more real to me than like the world anyway. I love that world more, I think, because it's perfectible, because I have perfected it. The actual world is the random garbage fire it always is. There's not a goddamn thing I can do about the actual world's code. He laughed at himself and then looked at Sam. How are you doing? And then the conversation continues. But this idea of like, when you create the world, you're in charge of it, and then it can bring you a lot of comfort.
Yeah, and I think what a thing that would resonate with, I think, so many of us, that there is so much about the world and our lives that we feel like we have absolutely no control over. And I think about the character of Sam, and we're introduced to him as when he's a child, and he's lost his mother, who was like his only parent, because he doesn't have a relationship with his father at all. And then he has this life-altering injury. And so talk about like something that would cause you to spiral and feel like I have no control. Everything about my world has shattered. What do I have? And that the idea of a game, and then eventually like the idea of the creation of a game is, and even later on in the book, because he ends up creating, I believe, is it Mapleville or Maple World?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember,
Maple World.
Melissa?
Yeah, Maple World.
Maple World. So, and he's Mayor Mazer of Maple. And like Maple World, if I remember correctly, is like a place where you can go, and it's almost like The Sims. Like you go and you create a character and you can live there and have like a whole life. there, and he's the mayor character, and so like
Mm,
he's in control of everything. Like he's in control like on the most macro of levels. He is literally creating the game, but then he's even control within the game. He's the person that's kind of controlling and like dictating how this world, is ultimately shaped. And yeah, what a comfort, what a sense of stability that would provide to someone who has felt at times so vulnerable to the world being so out of control. And
mm.
so I think that is such a great point.
Yeah, and like Sam himself tries to kind of blend sort of the video game worlds that he creates, and he tries to manipulate sort of the world that we live in based on that, because the original spelling of his name, like what would appear on his birth certificate, is Masur. But then
Mm.
he changes it to Mazer, sort of in this reference to mazes. So the pronunciation is the same, and he wants to sort of make the sort of embody this idea of these different paths. And he, early on, one of the first things he ever gives to Sadie when they're kids, I think it's like drawn on the back of an envelope or something, but she keeps it and frames it, is a maze. But I think that was so meaningful to him that he is trying to always kind of bring these game elements into different facets. So like those physical games, that maze that you would draw with a pencil, into his digital games, into his sort of quote unquote real life. Yeah, and he tries to kind of blend those two for sure. But I think this is a great segue to the final theme I wanted to talk about, possibly the biggest one of the whole book, and I mean, especially because it overlaps with so many of the other ones, and that's the theme of love. And so on the
Mm.
back of the book, like I read before, it says, yes, it is a love story, but it is not one you have read before. So Sarah, in your recollection of this book, what made this book a love story, and also what made it a love story that you've never, in a style you've never read before?
Really, it's a love story in depicting so many different types of love. And when we think of a love story, we think of romance. We think in a weird way almost exclusively of romantic love. Like that's our ultimate version of love. But the love that is explored within this book, I mean, you have the love of, I think it's really the love of friendship that sometimes can be the most long lasting and the most impactful. And I would certainly say that with these characters, with ultimately, our two like main protagonists of Sam and Sadie. But there you mentioned the Marks character, and there is a real love between Sam and Marks. They become friends in university, and they become partners. And Sam's a very prickly character, and he would be the first to admit it, I believe, and I think it's referenced throughout the book that he has a bit of a difficult personality, and he's prone to kind of isolating himself, and has a difficulty in kind of communicating and relating to others. And it's only through his, I guess, ability to create these games that he kind of almost develops like a persona that allows him to be able to interact with the world. But the love between Marks and Sam, the love that we see throughout the book between Sadie and Sam, the love that develops between Sadie and a couple different characters. There's a character who we haven't referenced at all yet, and his name is, I don't know how you pronounce it, but I always say Dove. I'm not
Oh,
sure.
yeah, yeah.
um, so I mean, he's someone that Sadie has a relationship with, and that has a friendship with other characters within the book. Sadie's relationship and friendship with Marks, the relationship between Sam and his grandparents, uh, all the different versions of love and what they mean to us, what they mean to those specific characters, how impactful they are. I think that's really what makes it a love story in the way that you would not necessarily think of, or that you wouldn't have encountered before. That ultimately, romantic love is only one like tiny piece of the bigger kind of love I guess, canvas that's out there. You know, by looking at just that one little part of it, you're not seeing the bigger and the broader power of love. So, how about you,
Yeah.
Melissa?
And yes, even even the actual like the romantic relationships that exist, they're never overdone. You know, there's never
Yeah.
any like scenes where it's really gushy and really overly descriptive in terms of like how they feel about one another. Really, the more descriptive passages about relationships and love are not about instances of romantic love that happen throughout. So the romantic relationships kind of happen in the background, even though they're powerful in terms of moving the story forward. You don't really get any intimate view of them, really, which serves the book well. Because at the end of the
Mm,
day, this is a story about Sam and Sadie. Like, this is their
yeah.
story. And there's a great deal of care and concern and acts of love and acts of kindness. And people say, you know, the only way you're going to get Sadie to do something is if she knows that she's going to do it and it's going to benefit Sam. And Sam's only going to do things if he thinks it's going to benefit Sadie. And they often misunderstand one another, but they sort of, you know, they'll always kind of oscillate back to each other as well. And they're always driven by, you know, what's going to be best for the other person. So I agree with you. It's like it allows you to really focus on the value, the meaning, the power of, I would say, like partnership and collaboration over romance and intimacy necessarily. And I thought that that was like a really lovely way of telling a love story in a new way.
Yeah, and I mean, when you think about it, it is a true partnership that, I mean, they create things together. So it's they have children in their own way, you know, of these games that they have
Mm.
collaborated on and created together. And so it is so much more than just a friendship. It's so much more than just a partnership. And the fact that, I mean, we do see them, like you said, over the period of like 30 years of from childhood all the way through essentially like middle age. Yeah, I thought, you know, what a beautiful thing to explore and in not a typical way. So, Melissa, I think we've gotten to that point.
We have.
Would you say that Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin is a could read, a should read, or a must read?
It's a must read. It is a must read. I loved this book. I thought it was so beautifully written. I loved the way that different sections of it influenced how I was experiencing things in my day to day life. I have no doubt that this book will stay with me. You know, did I love the characters necessarily? I don't know that I loved them as individuals. I loved
Mm.
what they showed me, I loved what they revealed to me. I absolutely love this book. And even that one section of Pioneers, when I got there and I started to see what was going to happen, I thought, because to that point I thought, I don't have a single criticism of this book. I had nothing that I wanted, that I would critique about that book. And then I got to that Pioneer section. I thought, okay, finally, this is where, like, you know, things are gonna slow down. But I loved, that was probably my favorite part of the book. It just kept getting better. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, absolutely a must read from me.
Excellent. And that is saying something because you do not give those out super readily. So
That's right.
that's great. And yeah, I will agree with you that after, you know, so many years of from when I initially read it, the fact that I've been thinking about it lately, even before we, you know, got into the planning of this episode is a testament to, I think, the craft of creating worlds, right? Both
100%.
within the book from the author's perspective and, you know, in creating video games. So, well, thank you very
Beautiful.
much, Melissa. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Awesome. Can't wait to talk to you again.
Bye.